Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside, I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. It was a foggy autumn evening in 1892, London, when the gas lamps barely pierced the yellow murk and the Thames carried its cold, briny breath through the streets. I had not seen Holmes so restless in weeks, pacing, pipe in hand, violin untouched. Then came the sharp knock at the door. A pale, trembling gentleman stepped in from the mist, clutching a single gold sovereign. Chapter 1. A case presents itself. It was a chill autumn in London, the year 1892, when the fog wrapped the city in a damp grey veil and the gas lamps struggled to pierce the murk with their jaundiced light. The air tasted faintly of coal smoke, and river mud carried on a raw wind off the Thames. I returned from a quiet morning at my Paddington practice to find 221 B. Baker Street hushed, save for the soft creak of settling floorboards and the distant rumble of omnibuses along Marylebone Road. Holmes had been unusually restless these past weeks. He paced before the fire in his mouse-coloured dressing gown, pipe clenched tight, the rich, sweet odour of shag tobacco thick in the room. His Stradivarius lay neglected on the mantel, its varnish catching the firelight in silent reproach. I had learned to tread carefully during such moods, though yet this one carried an edge sharper than usual, as though an unseen current stirred beneath his calm. The knock came suddenly. 3 brisk raps. Mrs. Hudson showed in a gentleman of perhaps 45, tall and spare, his dark overcoat glistening with mist. He removed his gloves with unsteady fingers. The kid leather was fine, but bore faint reddish smears along the cuffs, like dried clay. His face was drawn, the eyes shadowed beneath a high forehead. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes." His voice was cultured, controlled, yet strained. Holmes rose smoothly. "I am he. This is my friend Dr. Watson. Pray, take the basket chair, mister." Elliot Hargrove. He sat, the wicker sighing under his weight. "I come on a matter that touches both life and honour. A coin has vanished, and with it, a man's life." From an inner pocket, he produced a small velvet pouch and tipped its single occupant onto the table. A gold sovereign caught the lamplight, heavy and brilliant, not an ordinary piece. The Jubilee head of Victoria gleamed on the obverse, St. George and Dragon on the reverse, the fields mirror smooth, save for 1 minute raised line on the dragon's wing, a die flaw known only to specialists. "This is one of a matched pair," Hargrove said. The other, identical, save for that trifling flaw, was the pride of my late employer, Lord Archibald Voss. Last night, in his study at Belgrave Square, Lord Voss was found dead. The companion coin had disappeared from its case. Scotland Yard calls it suicide, poison, self-administered. I am convinced it was murder. Holmes leaned forward, eyes bright. The fire snapped, sending a shower of sparks upward. "Describe the scene precisely," he said. Hargrove drew a slow breath. Lord Voss sat at his desk, a tumbler overturned, liquid staining the blotter. A faint metallic odour hung in the air. Bitter, chemical. The study door was locked from within, key still in the lock. The mahogany coin case stood open on a side table. Only this sovereign remained. He had no cause for despair. The pair were to be auctioned at Christie's next month. 4,000 guineas at least. I lifted the coin. It lay warm and solid in my palm, the milled edge crisp against my fingertips. Hargrove's tale troubled me, though I could not yet say why. "You were his secretary?" Holmes asked. "His numismatic assistant. I catalogued the collection, arranged authentications. Lord Voss lived for these pieces. The pair were rarities, 1887 Jubilee proofs, struck in very small numbers for presentation. Who else had access to the study? Myself, the butler Grayson, and his nephew Reginald Voss, who stands to inherit. 4 guests dined that evening, fellow collectors, but none crossed the threshold of the study. Holmes set the coin down. We shall view the house tomorrow. For tonight, leave the matter in my hands. Hargrove rose, bowed stiffly, and vanished into the fog. The front door closed with a muffled thud. Holmes moved to the window, watching the hansom fade into the mist. Street lamps flickered like drowning stars. Poison in a locked room, I observed. Yet the missing coin points to theft. Precisely, Watson. And theft to cover murder is a darker business than robbery alone. He struck a match. Sulphur flared briefly, blending with tobacco smoke. I confess I noticed nothing remarkable in Hargrove's manner, though perhaps you, dear reader, were more observant than I. Next morning, we rattled through the streets in a hansom. The cold stung my cheeks. The horse's breath plumed white. Belgrave Square lay silent under leaden skies, the tall houses staring down with blank windows. Grayson, the butler, stooped, smelling faintly of boot-blacking and damp wool, admitted us. He conducted us to the study. The room matched the description. Mahogany desk, deep-buttoned leather chair still bearing the impression of a body. Papers lay scattered. Ink had dried in dark pools. A tumbler rested on its side, colourless residue clinging inside. The air held a lingering chemical sharpness, undercut by old leather, cigar ash, and the musty sweetness of aged books, and chalk marked where Lord Voss had fallen. The coin case sat open, velvet lining crushed where 2 recesses had once held gold. Holmes knelt, lens in hand. The Axminster carpet was thick, crimson. He studied a spot near the chair legs. Observe, Watson. 2 faint parallel scuffs, as though something were dragged a short distance. And here, he indicated a small brass key half hidden beneath the desk. The study key. Yet the door was locked when the household forced entry. Grayson cleared his throat. Lordship always locked himself in when studying his catalogues, hated interruptions. The poison, Holmes asked. Digitalis, the doctor said. Foxglove. Overdose. Suicide? And the coin? Gone. He displayed both pieces after dinner, retired here at 10. We discovered him near midnight. Holmes paced, fingers steepled. It floorboards, groaned, softly. Guests' names. Cecil Langford, rival collector, Mrs. Evelyn March, a widow of means, young Mr. Reginald Voss, Professor Harlan Crowe, the authenticator. We shall speak with them. But first, the body. At the mortuary, the air was dank and cold, heavy with carbolic and mortality. Lord Voss lay peaceful, lips faintly cyanosed, no sign of struggle. Holmes bent over the right hand and cuff. No defensive marks, yet the cuff bears a fresh tear and traces of reddish clay mingled with coal dust, not soil from this district, more akin to the East End docks or foundries. I looked again. The tear was small, the dust barely visible. I confess the significance escaped me entirely. I wonder if it escaped you as well. Holmes straightened. This is murder, Watson. Carefully staged. Someone killed Lord Voss for that coin and arranged the scene to suggest despair. We stepped into the wind. Distant ships' bells tolled from the river. The mystery tightened its grip, drawing us onward into the shadowed heart of the city. Chapter 2. Into London streets. It was late afternoon when we left Belgrave Square, the fog now so dense it swallowed the tops of the houses. The hansom cab's lamps burned feebly, casting watery halos on wet stone. Hooves clopped dully, wheels hissed through puddles. The cold had sharpened, biting through my coat, and every breath carried the gritty taste of coal smoke mixed with river damp. Our first destination was Christie's in King Street, St. James's. The auction rooms smelled of polished oak, old paper, and the lingering perfume of yesterday's bidders. Gas mantles hissed overhead, shedding steady yellow light on glass cases and bound catalogues. The chief clerk, thin and bespectacled, with ink-darkened cuffs, consulted his ledger after Holmes offered his card. "Lord Voss's entries were confirmed," he said. "Two 1887 Jubilee-proof sovereigns, exceptional quality and rarity, estimated 4,000 guineas for the pair. Withdrawn 3 days ago." "By whose authority?" Holmes asked. "Lord Voss himself. A messenger delivered a note, cited private considerations, requested immediate removal." "May we see the note?" The clerk fetched it from a drawer. Thick cream-laid paper, embossed with the Voss crest. Holmes held it to the light. "The ink is fresh, no bloom of age, applied within days. Yet the signature's capital V shows a distinct hesitation, a tremor absent elsewhere." We left with the note, folded in Holmes's pocketbook. The cab rattled next to Mayfair, to Mr. Cecil Langford's residence. The hallway smelled of beeswax and roast joint drifting from below stairs. Langford met us in a long drawing-room lined with locked cabinets, ancient silver and bronze coins gleaming under soft lamplight. He was stout, red-faced, and had brandy on his breath, despite the hour. "Voss, shocking affair. We dined that night. He was in rare form, boasting about those sovereigns." "Did he show them?" Holmes inquired. "After the port, the case went round the table. We all handled the pair. Superb. The weight, the mirror fields, that minute die floor on one dragon's wing. A true prize. You collect?" "Roman principally, but I know fine modern gold." No envy on my part, Mr. Holmes. I've no need to pilfer." Holmes noted a small brass coin cabinet on the mantel. "Style similar to Voss's. Yet your arrangements suggest familiarity with such pieces." Langford gave a short laugh. "Our circle shares tastes." We thanked him and departed, the front door closing with a heavy thud. Kensington followed. Mrs. Evelyn March's house in a quiet square carried the scent of dried lavender and beeswax polish. She received us in a cool drawing-room, fire low, black silk rustling as she rose, silver-haired, composed, diamonds glinting modestly on her fingers. "Lord Voss was a valued friend," she said softly. "His death has left a void. The coins, yes, I saw them that evening, held them briefly. Such purity, such history concentrated in one's palm." Her hands remained steady. Yet when Holmes mentioned Reginald Voss, her mouth tightened, fractionally. "The nephew quarrelled with his uncle recently," she said. "Debts, gambling, I understand. The Turf Club, perhaps, or one of the Strand houses. And your own interest in the pieces." "Sentimental. My husband collected. I preserve his memory. Nothing more." We left her in the gathering dusk. Our last call was Professor Harlan Crowe, in rooms near the British Museum. The place was scholarly disorder, books teetering, air thick with pipe tobacco, chemical solvent, and a faint metallic tang of acid used for cleaning. Crowe was elderly, spare, spectacles on a sharp nose, fingers stained dark. "The sovereigns were genuine," he stated at once. "I authenticated them personally. The die floor is documented. A known variety. Voss planned to auction, then abruptly withdrew. Spoke of a private offer, substantial, he hinted." "From whom?" "He did not confide, but he appeared unsettled, almost apprehensive." "You entered the study that night?" "Briefly, before dinner concluded, to review provenance." The case lay open on his desk. He locked the door as I departed. Holmes examined a large magnifying lens on the cluttered desk, much like his own. "You are well equipped?" "Essential in this field." We returned to Baker Street as street lamps flared one by one. The fog pressed against the windows like a grey tide, muffling the clatter of evening traffic. Holmes settled in his chair, pipe sending slow spirals of blue smoke ceilingward. "The evidence mounts," he observed. A sudden auction withdrawal, a fresh note with a trembling signature, a private offer, a locked study, a vanished coin, a death by poison. Of 4 guests, all handled the pieces. Motives entwine. Inheritance for the nephew, rivalry for Langford, attachment or avarice for Mrs. March, scholarly advantage for Crow. Consider the facts as we knew them then. The hesitant signature, traces of reddish dust on cuffs, whispers of gambling debts, the mention of a secret buyer. What would you conclude? Holmes tapped out ash with a soft, metallic click. The game is afoot, Watson, yet the players move in half-light. With every street we crossed, every conversation we held, the questions multiplied, drawing us deeper into the shadowed web. Chapter 4. Shadows and Suspicions. The fog had lifted by morning, leaving London raw and glistening under a pale sun. The streets smelled of wet horse manure and fresh bread from corner bakeries. The air tasted clean for once, almost metallic. Holmes and I set out early, determined to press each suspect more closely. The reddish dust on cuffs and the hesitant signature on the auction note had become fixed points in my mind, small, nagging inconsistencies that refused to align. We began at the Turf Club in St. James's Street. The porter, smelling faintly of cigar smoke and polished brass, admitted us after Holmes produced his card. Reginald Voss was not in the card room, but the steward remembered him well. Mr. Reginald, regular enough, sir. Played deep last month. Baccarat mostly. Lost heavily to a foreign gentleman, dark complexion, spoke little English, settled part in notes, part promised on his uncle's forthcoming windfall, left in a temper when pressed. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A windfall from the coin sale. So he hinted, sir. Said his uncle's collection would clear every debt. We left the club, the heavy door shutting with a resonant thud. Reginald's gambling debts offered a clear motive, inheritance, accelerated by murder. Yet the locked room and poison felt too deliberate for a desperate nephew's hand. Next we called again on Cecil Langford in Mayfair. He received us in his study this time, the air thick with the scent of old vellum and a trace of spirits. Display cases lined the walls. Roman denarii glinted coldly. "You return so soon?" Langford asked, voice hearty, but eyes wary. Holmes produced the auction withdrawal note. "This bears Lord Voss's hand, yet the signature trembles. You dined with him that night. Did he seem unwell? Nervous?" Langford studied the paper. "He was animated, perhaps a trifle flushed. Mentioned a private buyer who'd offered more than Christie's estimate. Said he needed time to consider. I assumed family pressure." Family. Reginald's debts were no secret. Voss spoke of cutting the young man off unless he reformed. A false trail? Perhaps. Langford, deflecting suspicion toward the nephew. Yet his own cabinets held similar brass cases. He knew how to handle such pieces discreetly. We moved to Kensington and Mrs. Evelyn March. She met us in her conservatory, surrounded by ferns and the warm, earthy smell of damp soil and hothouse blooms. Sunlight filtered green through glass panes. The temperature was noticeably higher than the street. "More questions?" she asked, arranging a spray of orchids with steady hands. Holmes inclined his head. "You mentioned Reginald's quarrels. Did Lord Voss ever speak of selling privately to settle debts?" "Never directly. But he was protective of the collection, said once that certain buyers, foreign buyers, could not be trusted with such treasures. He distrusted haste." Her words hung in the humid air. Foreign buyers, the same phrase the Turf Club steward had used, a connection or coincidence. Our final morning call was to Professor Harlan Crowe near the British Museum. His rooms smelled strongly now of nitric acid and burnt tobacco. A small chemical burner hissed on the desk. He greeted us with distracted courtesy, spectacles slipping down his nose. "You've returned," he said. "I expected as much." Holmes laid the coin Hargrove had entrusted to us on the blotter. "Examine it again, Professor. Note especially the die flaw." Crowe lifted it to his lens. His breathing quickened slightly. "Identical to the authenticated pair, the flaw is unmistakable. Raised line on the dragon's upper wing. Voss showed both that night. I left before he retired." "Did he mention a private offer?" Holmes pressed. Crowe hesitated. "He did. A gentleman from the continent, Swiss, I believe, substantial sum. Voss seemed tempted but wary, said something about provenance papers needing verification." Swiss. Foreign. The word echoed again. We stepped out into the chill once more. The sun had vanished behind clouds. A fine drizzle began, cold against the skin. Holmes walked in silence for several paces, coat collar turned up, pipe unlit between his teeth. 5 threads, he said at last. Reginald's debts point to desperation. Langford's knowledge of coin cases suggests opportunity. Mrs. March's reserve hides something, perhaps old loyalties or old grudges. Crow's chemical expertise could extend to poisons, and Hargrove himself, that reddish dust on his gloves matches the traces on the dead man's cuff. 3 men had opportunity that night. 3 had motive of one kind or another. Which would you suspect? I felt the net drawing tighter, yet every suspect seemed to point a finger elsewhere. The private buyer hovered like a shadow, unseen, unnamed, yet central. We returned to Baker Street in the early afternoon. The sitting-room fire crackled warmly. Mrs. Hudson had left sandwiches and a pot of tea. The china was hot to the touch, the bread still soft. Holmes stood at the window, watching rain streak the glass. The dust, Watson. Red clay with coal particles. It clings stubbornly. I sent a sample to my chemical friend Stamford this morning. He reports it consistent with soil near the Shadwell docks, where foreign vessels frequently berth. Docks, foreign buyer, Swiss or otherwise. The afternoon wore on. A telegram arrived from Lestrade. Reginald Voss taken into custody at club. Gambling debts confirmed. Claims innocence. A false lead or the first break? Holmes crumpled the paper. They rushed to judgment. The nephew may be in debt, but the poison was administered with precision. Digitalis requires knowledge, dosage, timing. Reginald is no scholar of toxicology. He paced slowly, boots soft on the rug. The rain drummed harder now, a steady tattoo against the panes. The truth lies, not in haste, he murmured. But in the patient tracing of each thread until one pulls taut. I stared at the scattered notes on the table. Names, places, fragments of conversation. The case felt closer, yet still maddeningly out of reach. The net was closing, inch by inch, and I could sense the shape of something darker beneath the surface. Chapter 5. The Pursuit. The rain had settled into a steady, wind-driven slant by the time we left Baker Street that evening. Hansom cabs splashed past in the half-light, their wheels throwing up sheets of water that glittered under gas lamps. The air tasted cold and metallic, laced with the sharp odour of wet coal smoke drifting from 1,000 chimneys. Holmes had barely finished his pipe when a second telegram arrived from Lestrade. Short, urgent, Reginald Voss released. Alibi confirmed by club waiter. New development at Shadwell docks. Meet me at once. Holmes crumpled the paper. The docks, the reddish clay. We move now. We hailed a cab and rattled eastward through darkening streets. The city changed as we crossed the invisible line beyond the tower. Narrower lanes, taller warehouses, the constant low thunder of drays and the hoarse shouts of stevedores working late. The smell of the Thames grew stronger, brackish water, tar, rotting fish, and the oily reek of engine grease from moored steamers. Lanterns swung on poles, casting trembling yellow pools on slick cobbles. Lestrade waited under the overhang of a warehouse door, collar turned up, breath steaming. Holmes, Doctor. Glad you came. One of my men spotted a fellow matching Hargrove's description. Same build, same coat, entering a bonded warehouse an hour ago, carrying a small case. The night watchman says the place belongs to a shipping agent who handles continental cargo. Swiss markings on some crates. Holmes's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. Lead on. We followed Lestrade along a narrow wharf. The river lapped hungrily at wooden pilings. Ropes creaked with the tide. A single lantern burned above a heavy door marked Schweizer Fracht AG. Lestrade knocked twice. No answer. He tried the latch. Locked. Holmes produced a set of picks from his coat. Metal clicked softly. The lock gave with a muted snap. We stepped inside. The warehouse was vast and dim, lit only by a few hanging lamps that threw long shadows across stacked crates and coiled ropes. The air was thick with the musty scent of jute sacking, linseed oil, and the faint chemical bite of preserved timber. Crates bore stenciled legends in German and French. The one stack carried the Red Cross of Switzerland. A figure moved at the far end. Quick, furtive, footsteps echoed on the stone floor. Holmes raised a hand. We advanced silently. The man was Hargrove. He knelt beside an open crate, a small brass case in his hands, the twin of Lord Voss's coin box. As we drew nearer, he looked up, face pale in the lamplight. "Mr. Holmes," he began. Holmes stepped forward. "Step away from the case, Mr. Hargrove." Hargrove rose slowly. "This is not what it appears." Lestrade moved to block the door. "You're under arrest for suspicion of murder and theft." Hargrove's eyes darted. "I came to recover the coin. For the estate. Lord Voss confided in me about a private buyer. He feared robbery. He asked me to safeguard the pair if anything happened." Holmes knelt beside the open crate. Inside lay packing straw and a velvet pouch. He lifted it carefully. The remaining sovereign gleamed. "Yet you bring it here, to a Swiss shipping agent. Curious place to safeguard an heirloom." Hargrove swallowed. "The buyer was Swiss, a collector in Zurich. Lord Voss arranged the sale privately to avoid Christie's commission. He changed his mind at the last moment, said the price was too low for what the pieces represented. He withdrew the auction entry himself." Holmes turned the coin slowly. "And the poison?" "I swear I know nothing of poison." A sudden scuffle broke out near the rear door. A second man, tall, dark-haired, foreign in cut of coat, burst from behind a stack of barrels and sprinted toward the wharf exit. Lestrade shouted. We gave chase. The pursuit spilled onto the rain-slick wharf. The man slipped once, recovered. They vaulted a coil of rope. Holmes ran with long, economical strides. I followed, lungs burning from the damp air. The fugitive reached a gangplank leading to a small steam launch moored below. He leapt aboard. The engine coughed to life with a belch of oily smoke. Holmes skidded to a halt at the edge. "Watson, rope!" I seized a loose mooring line, thick and tarry, and tossed it. Holmes caught it, looped it round a bollard. The launch pulled away, straining the rope, taut. Wood groaned. The bollard held. The man at the wheel cursed in German. He gunned the engine. The rope snapped with a whip crack. The launch surged into the Black River, vanishing into fog and night. We stood panting, rain streaming down our faces. Lestrade arrived, breathless. "Lost him, but we have Hargrove." Back inside the warehouse, Hargrove sat on a crate, head in hands. In the brass case lay open beside him, empty, save for a single folded letter. Holmes unfolded it. "Addressed to Lord Voss, from Zurich. An offer. 6,000 guineas for the pair. Sight unseen, no questions of provenance. Signed H. Vogel." Holmes looked at Hargrove. "You knew of this letter?" Hargrove nodded miserably. "Lord Voss showed it to me. He was tempted, then refused, said the coins were part of Britain's heritage. He intended to donate them to the British Museum instead." Holmes studied the paper. The signature matches the auction withdrawal note. Same tremor, but not Lord Voss's hand, forged by someone who wished the withdrawal to appear his own decision. The key evidence lay before us. The forged note, the private offer, the attempt to spirit the coin away by night. Yet, the poison remained unexplained. Holmes's voice was low. "Digitalis is a plant extract, foxglove, easy to obtain, difficult to dose, fatally without knowledge. Professor Crow has chemicals in his rooms. Mrs. March grows flowers in her conservatory. Langford drinks brandy. Foxglove tincture was once a heart remedy in country houses. Even Hargrove could have access through the household. I confess I was lost amid the directions the evidence pointed. Were you any clearer?" Holmes straightened. "We returned to Baker Street. The chase has shown us one truth. The coin was not taken for greed alone. It was taken to silence a man who changed his mind. The stakes had risen sharply. A foreign buyer, a forged letter, a midnight escape on the Thames. The resolution felt close, yet still veiled in mist and shadow. And Chapter 6. The past speaks. The rain had eased to a fine mist by the time we returned to Baker Street that night. The sitting-room fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the Persian rug and warming the air with the faint, comforting smell of cedar logs and old tobacco. Mrs. Hudson had left a tray of cold supper, ham, bread, and a decanter of sherry, but neither Holmes nor I had much appetite. The events at Shadwell Docks lingered like the river's brackish odour on our clothes. Holmes stood motionless by the mantel, fingers steepled, staring into the flames. The brass coin case from the warehouse rested on the table between us, its velvet lining still indented where the second sovereign had lain until moments before the chase. The forged letter from H. Vogel lay unfolded beside it, the paper slightly curled from damp. "Forged," Holmes said at last, voice quiet. The tremor in the signature is deliberate, an attempt to mimic hesitation from illness or age, yet the pressure of the pen is too uniform. Lord Voss's hand, when I examined samples from his desk, varied naturally with the mood. This is mechanical imitation. I poured sherry into 2 glasses. The liquid caught the firelight like molten amber. Then Hargrove, or someone close to him, knew the contents of that letter. Knew Voss intended to refuse the offer and donate the coins instead. Holmes nodded slowly. Precisely. And refusal meant the end of a lucrative transaction. 6,000 guineas is no trifling sum, even split several ways. He crossed to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew a thin file of notes he had compiled over the preceding days. Game pages rustled softly as he spread them out, sketches of boot prints from the study carpet, chemical analysis of the reddish clay, transcripts of our interviews. "The past speaks here, Watson," he said. "Let us listen." He began with Professor Harlan Crowe. "Crowe authenticated the coins 5 years ago. A letter in the British Museum archives, courtesy of a discreet inquiry this afternoon, reveals he once consulted for a Zurich numismatic firm, H. Vogel and Sons. Small concern, specializing in high-value British rarities for private collectors on the continent. Crowe's name appears on several provenance reports." I leaned forward. "So, Crowe knew the buyer?" "More than knew. He recommended Vogel to Voss 2 years ago, after Voss expressed interest in realizing capital from part of his collection. The relationship cooled when Voss grew protective of certain pieces. Crowe, however, maintained contact." Holmes turned to another sheet. "Cecil Langford? Less obvious, but his steward at the Turf Club recalls a dinner 6 months past where Langford entertained a Swiss gentleman described as cultured, reserved, heavy gold watch chain. Langford later boasted of a lucrative arrangement in the coin trade. The motive sharpened. Not mere theft, but a thwarted sale orchestrated by intermediaries who stood to profit handsomely. Mrs. Evelyn March proved subtler." Holmes tapped a small newspaper clipping. "Obituary of her late husband, Colonel March, retired Indian Army. He served in Bombay with a Captain Harlan Crowe. Same man, during the mutiny's aftermath. They remained correspondents. Mrs. M. March inherited her husband's small but select collection of Indian and British medals. She sold several pieces quietly through Crowe's recommendation, again to continental buyers." I sipped the sherry. It was smooth, faintly sweet, cutting the lingering taste of river fog on my tongue. A network, then. Crowe the authenticator and go-between, Langford the social introducer, Mrs. March the silent partner with old ties, and Hargrove, Holmes said, handled the daily affairs. He catalogued, packed, shipped when necessary. The reddish clay on his cuffs and Voss's came from the same source, Shadwell Docks, where Swiss consignments are frequently unloaded. He was the courier. The picture formed gradually, piece by interlocking piece. Lord Voss, passionate collector, turned reluctant seller, and had agreed in principle to the private sale. But upon receiving Vogel's final offer, and, perhaps learning more of the buyer's intentions, he recoiled. The coins, he decided, belonged in a museum, not a private vault in Zurich. He forged his own hesitation in withdrawing from Christie's, planning to announce the donation publicly. Someone, likely Crow, with his chemical knowledge, saw the fortune slipping away. Digitalis, easily obtained from Foxglove in Mrs. March's conservatory, or through Crow's own laboratory supplies, could mimic a heart attack in an elderly man already under strain. A small dose in the after-dinner brandy, administered during the brief visit to the study. The locked door, simple. Voss himself turned the key after Crow left, unaware of the poison already working. The scuff marks on the carpet came from dragging the chair slightly as the body slumped. No more mystery than that. The coin was taken to complete the pair for delivery to Vogel. Hargrove was dispatched to the docks to make the handover, expecting the death to be ruled natural or suicide. Holmes paced slowly now, the floorboards creaking under his boots. The nephew's debts were a useful red herring, known to all in the circle. Reginald was loud about them, giving the impression of desperation, but he had no access to the study after dinner. Grayson confirms it. I looked at the scattered papers. The connections were there, hidden in plain sight until now. In hindsight, we should have known. The signs were there, the private offer, the forged note, the foreign ties, the dust from the docks. Holmes stopped before the fire. One final thread. I wired the British Museum this afternoon. Their curator confirms receipt of a letter from Lord Voss, posted the morning of his death, offering the Jubilee pair as a bequest. It arrived this morning. Too late to save him, but in time to damn those who killed him. The room fell quiet, save for the soft crackle of coals and the muffled clop of a late hansom passing below. The case, it had shifted from bafflement to clarity. Motive was greed, pure and orchestrated. The past, of old friendships, shared expeditions to auction houses, quiet deals in back rooms, had woven the rope that hanged them. Holmes returned to his chair and lit a fresh pipe. The match flared, tobacco smoke curled upward in slow blue spirals. The pieces connect, Watson. Tomorrow we confront them, each in turn. The truth, when spoken aloud, will be inescapable. I felt the weight of what lay ahead. The net had drawn tight. Now only the final drawing remained. Chapter 7. The truth emerges. The morning broke grey and raw, with a thin drizzle hissing against the window panes of 221B Baker Street. The sitting room smelled of fresh coffee and the faint, acrid bite of coal smoke drifting up from the street below. Holmes had sent telegrams at dawn. Now the suspects arrived one by one, summoned under the pretext of important new evidence regarding the coin. The air grew thick with tension and the mingled scents of damp wool, lavender water, and expensive cigar residue. Professor Harlan Crow entered first, spectacles misted, fingers stained as always with ink and chemicals. Mrs. Evelyn March followed, black silk rustling softly, a faint trace of hothouse orchids clinging to her gloves. Cecil Langford came next, red-faced and blustering, bringing the odour of brandy and wet leather. Elliot Hargrove arrived last, pale and silent, the reddish clay still faintly visible on his cuffs. Reginald Voss, released and bewildered, completed the circle. Holmes stood by the mantel, pipe unlit, fingers steepled. The fire crackled sharply. "Gentlemen, madam, thank you for coming. The coin has been recovered. The murderer of Lord Voss stands in this room." A collective intake of breath filled the space. Langford's chair creaked under his sudden shift. Crow's knuckles whitened on his walking stick. Holmes began quietly, almost conversationally. "Let us start with observation. The reddish clay on Lord Voss's cuff and on Mr. Hargrove's gloves, coal dust mixed in, and Stamford's analysis confirmed it came from the Shadwell docks, where Swiss freight is unloaded. Hargrove was seen there last night with the missing sovereign, attempting delivery to a bonded warehouse marked Schweizer Fracht AG. The forged withdrawal note from Christie's, tremor imitated, pressure too even. matches the handwriting of the Zurich offer letter, signed H. Vogel. He turned to Crow. You authenticated the coins, Professor. You also recommended Vogel to Lord Voss 2 years ago. Your rooms contain the very solvents and acids needed to clean and test gold. More importantly, they contain digitalis tincture, foxglove extract, clearly labelled on your shelf. The poison that killed Lord Voss. Crow's face drained of colour. Preposterous. I merely... Holmes raised a hand. During your brief visit to the study that night, after dinner, you admired the open coin case. Voss poured brandy for both of you. His habit. While his back was turned to lock the door after you supposedly left, you slipped the digitalis into his glass. A precise dose. Heart failure within the hour. He locked himself in, as always. The scuff marks on the carpet. Simply the chair shifting as he collapsed. No locked room mystery at all. Mrs. March's gloved hand flew to her throat. Harlan. Mrs. March, Holmes continued smoothly. Your conservatory grows foxglove among the orchids. Colonel March's old Indian Army correspondence with Professor Crow gave you both the perfect introduction to Lord Voss's circle. You provided the plant. Crow prepared the tincture. Langford introduced the Swiss buyer at the Turf Club 6 months ago and stood to receive a commission on the private sale. Hargrove was the courier, packing, delivering, collecting his share. The nephew's debts were a convenient distraction everyone knew about. Hargrove slumped forward. I only delivered the coin. I never... Exactly, Holmes cut in. You knew the plan, but lacked the nerve to administer the poison. When Voss changed his mind and wrote to the British Museum offering the coins as a bequest, the entire arrangement collapsed. 6,000 guineas vanished. Murder was the only way to silence him and complete the delivery. The room was deathly still, save for the soft hiss of rain and the ticking of the mantel clock. Langford mopped his brow with a silk handkerchief. I swear, I thought it was a legitimate sale. Holmes's eyes gleamed. You all profited from the secrecy. None of you questioned why Voss suddenly withdrew from Christie's. None of you mentioned the foreign buyer to the police. The signs were there from the first evening. The dust, the forged tremor, the private offer, the chemical knowledge. I saw them immediately. I wonder how many of you saw them too? I stared at the group, heart pounding. Holmes had woven every stray thread into a single rope. The torn cuff, the hesitant signature, the conservatory flowers, the warehouse crates, all plain now. I confess I had been utterly lost among the suspects until this moment. Had you, dear reader, already guessed the professor's hand behind the poison? Crow rose unsteadily, voice trembling. You have no proof beyond conjecture? Holmes smiled thinly. The proof is on its way. Lestrade is downstairs with 2 constables. The Zurich letter, the coin, the digitalis bottle from your rooms, already seized this morning, will speak clearly enough in court. The British Museum letter confirming the bequest arrived too late to save Lord Voss, but in time to condemn you all. Lestrade entered then, rain dripping from his coat, the metallic click of handcuffs loud in the quiet. Professor Harlan Crow, I arrest you for the willful murder of Lord Archibald Voss. The rest of you, conspiracy to defraud and accessory after the fact. Crow's shoulders sagged. Mrs. March wept silently into her handkerchief. Langford protested loudly, but allowed himself to be led away. Hargrove simply bowed his head, defeated. As the prisoners were taken down the stairs, their footsteps echoing on the wooden treads, Holmes turned to me. The truth, Watson, is rarely dramatic. It is merely the patient accumulation of small facts until the impossible is eliminated. I poured brandy with a hand that still shook slightly. The liquid burned warm down my throat, cutting the chill that had settled in the room. Justice had begun its slow, inexorable turn. The coin would return to the British Museum, as Lord Voss intended. The conspirators faced the dock. The shadow that had fallen over Belgrave Square was lifting at last. Nothing, in my experience, had prepared me for the quiet satisfaction of this moment, nor for how completely Holmes had seen what lay hidden in plain sight. Chapter 8. Justice. The drizzle had turned to steady rain by the time the police van clattered away from Baker Street. Its wheels hissed over wet cobbles, the iron-shod hooves of the horses ringing sharp against stone. Inside 221B, the air still carried the faint trace of damp wool and lavender water left by the departing suspects. Holmes stood at the window, watching the van's lantern disappear into the grey curtain of rain. I poured 2 glasses of brandy. The decanter clinked softly against the tray, the spirit warm and nutty on the tongue. Lestrade returned within the hour, shaking water from his coat. "Crows in the cells at Scotland Yard," he said, voice rough with satisfaction. Singing like a canary once we showed him the digitalis bottle from his own shelf and the Zurich letter. The others are talking too. March, Langford, Hargrove, all pointing fingers at the professor. We rode with him through the downpour to the yard. The corridors smelled of carbolic wet surge and strong tea. Gas jets hissed overhead, casting long shadows on tiled walls. Professor Harlan Crowe sat in a bare interview room, wrists manacled to the table, spectacles askew. His face was the color of old parchment. The chemical stain on his fingers looked darker under the harsh light. Holmes took the chair opposite. "You may as well finish the story, Professor. The court will hear it soon enough." Crowe stared at his hands for a long moment. The rain drummed steadily against the high-barred window. At last he spoke, voice low and bitter. "Voss changed his mind. After years of careful negotiation, my introductions, Langford's social connections, Mrs. March's quiet funding, we had Vogel ready to pay 6,000 guineas. Then Voss writes to the museum, donates the coins. My share, 2,000, gone in a stroke of his pen. I had prepared the tincture weeks earlier, foxglove from Evelyn's conservatory, concentrated in my laboratory, a few drops in the brandy while he turned to lock the door. Simple, clean, heart failure before midnight." He gave a short, mirthless laugh. "I even helped Grayson force the door next morning, stood there while the doctor called it suicide." "Perfect." Lestrade leaned forward. "And the coin?" "Hargrove was to deliver it that night. I took the sovereign from the case after Voss collapsed." "The scuff marks?" "My boot when I moved the chair so the body would look natural. Hargrove panicked when the museum letter arrived, tried to complete the sale anyway." Full questions poured out in the quiet room. How had the forged note been written? Crowe admitted practicing Voss's signature for weeks, using letters from his files. Why the reddish clay? Hargrove had carried the coin in the same pocket he used for dock deliveries. The dust transferred. What of Reginald Voss? Crowe smiled thinly. The boy's debts were useful noise. We encouraged his gambling stories. Holmes listened without interruption, eyes gleaming. When Crowe fell silent, Holmes spoke gently. "You eliminated the impossible, Professor. The locked room, the missing coin, the private buyer, all pointed one way. You simply failed to see that the past, your own letters, your chemical shelves, Mrs. March's garden, would speak louder than any lie." Crowe looked up then, defeat in every line of his face. "I was so close. The launch was waiting. Vogel would have paid on delivery." Outside, the rain eased. We left the yard as evening fell. Street lamps flickered to life, their reflections dancing in puddles. Back at Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson had lit the lamps and laid a simple supper, roast beef, still warm, the gravy rich and savoury. Reginald Voss arrived shortly after, hat in hand, eyes bright with relief. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I cannot thank you enough," he said, voice thick. "The charges are dropped. Uncle's will stands. The estate is mine, but the coins, they belong in the museum now. I've already arranged it." The young man's shoulders straightened as he spoke. The shadow of suspicion that had clung to him for days lifted visibly in the firelight. Holmes inclined his head. "Justice moves slowly, Mr. Voss, but it moves. Your uncle's bequest will be honoured. The conspirators face trial next month. Crowe will hang. The others will see long years in prison. I watched Reginald leave, the front door closing with a solid, final click. Then the house felt lighter somehow. The coin case now rested on the mantel, empty but no longer menacing. Mrs. March's orchids would bloom for no one in her empty conservatory. Langford's cabinets would gather dust while he waited in a cell. Holmes settled into his chair, lighting his pipe at last. Blue smoke curled upward, sweet and familiar. I stared into the fire, the day's events replaying in my mind, the handcuffs' metallic snap, Crow's broken confession, the nephew's grateful handshake. Nothing in my experience prepared me for the quiet finality of this moment. Chapter 9. Restoration. Weeks passed in a grey procession of court appearances and newspaper headlines. The Old Bailey's great hall smelled of polished oak, stale wool gowns, and the faint metallic tang of ink from endless ledgers. Rain drummed steadily against the high windows, cold and relentless, while inside the temperature hovered just above chill. I sat beside Holmes in the public gallery, the wooden bench hard beneath my coat. Professor Harlan Crowe stood in the dock, shoulders bowed, spectacles catching the weak light. The jury returned after only 2 hours, guilty of murder, guilty of conspiracy. The judge's voice echoed flatly. Penal servitude for life. Crowe did not look up as the warders led him away. The chain between his ankles clinked softly on the stone floor. Mrs. Evelyn March received 15 years. Her black silk rustled one final time as she was escorted below. Cecil Langford drew 12 years. His bluster had long since evaporated in the witness box. Elliot Hargrove, for his lesser role, was sentenced to 7. The court rose with a collective sigh. Then the sound of shuffling feet and murmured voices filling the vaulted space. Outside, the air tasted cleaner, washed by the rain. Holmes and I walked slowly along the Strand, hansoms splashing past. The pavement felt slick under our boots, the leather of my shoes grown supple with damp. Reginald Voss waited for us at the corner tea room, a small table by the window. Steam rose from the teapot, fragrant with Darjeeling and a hint of lemon. The china was warm to the touch. "They're gone," he said quietly, stirring his cup. "The estate is settled. Uncle's letter to the museum has been honoured. The Jubilee pair are on display this very week. Under glass, where they belong." I watched him closely. The shadow that had haunted his eyes since that first night in Belgrave Square had lifted entirely. His hands no longer trembled. In his voice carried new steadiness. Looking back, the signs of his innocence had been there from the beginning, the open quarrels, the public debts, yet suspicion had clung like the river mud. I wonder now whether any reader saw through them more quickly than I did. The following morning, Grayson, the old butler, called at Baker Street. He carried a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. The hallway smelled of rain on his coat and the faint polish of his boots. "Lord Voss wished you to have this, Mr. Holmes," he said, placing the package on the table. Inside lay a single gold sovereign, the remaining Jubilee proof, its mirror fields catching the firelight. Not the full pair, of course. The museum keeps its mate, but he wrote in his final instructions that you should receive one as thanks. Holmes turned the coin slowly between his fingers. The milled edge felt crisp and cool. A generous gesture. I shall keep it as a reminder that even the rarest treasures find their proper home. Grayson's lined face softened. "The household is quiet now, sir, but clean. No more locked doors after dinner. No more whispers about foreign buyers." He left with a bow, the front door closing with a solid, reassuring thud. Normalcy began to return in small, familiar ways. Mrs. Hudson's breakfasts resumed their cheerful rhythm. Bacon crisp, eggs still warm, the scent of fresh toast filling the sitting room. Holmes's violin sang again in the evenings, the notes rising and falling like the tide. I resumed my modest practice in Paddington, the waiting room smelling of carbolic and damp umbrellas. One quiet afternoon, I found Holmes at the window, Then the recovered sovereign, resting on the mantel beside his pipe. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the first pale hint of spring touched the plane trees in the square. "The case is truly closed," I said. He nodded without turning. "The innocent walk free. The guilty are where they belong. Order, Watson. Simple, stubborn order has been restored." I confess that in the weeks that followed, I often reflected on how narrow the margin had been. A single letter posted too late, a handful of dust from the docks, a tremor in a forged signature. The truth had lain before us all along, hidden only by our own haste to explain the obvious. Perhaps the reader, following these pages with cooler eyes, noted the pattern sooner than I. If so, I salute your sharper vision. For my part, I remain content to have walked beside the man who saw it first. That the coin gleamed quietly on the mantel. London moved on, beyond the windows, cabs rattling, street cries rising, the great wheel of the city turning once more in its accustomed groove. At 221 B. Baker Street, peace had settled like a familiar coat, and that, in the end, was restoration enough. Chapter 10. Baker Street Reflections. A soft spring evening had settled over London, the kind that turns the gas lamps to gentle gold and carries the first faint scent of hyacinths from the window boxes below. Inside 221B Baker Street, the fire crackled cheerfully, sending waves of warmth across the Persian rug and touching the brass fittings with a rosy glow. Mrs. Hudson had cleared the supper things, roast pheasant still fragrant on the plates, and left a decanter of port on the side table. The ruby liquid caught the firelight like liquid jewels. May Holmes reclined in his armchair, long legs stretched toward the hearth, pipe drawing steadily. The sweet, familiar aroma of shag tobacco mingled with the cedar smoke and the faint leather scent of the old volumes on the shelves. His violin rested on the mantel, silent now, but the strings still hummed faintly from an earlier melody. I sat opposite, a newspaper folded on my knee, the paper crisp beneath my fingers. "The evening edition arrived," I said, tapping the sheet. "The museum has placed both Jubilee sovereigns on permanent display. The curator calls them a national treasure restored." Reginald Voss attended the opening this afternoon. Grayson stood beside him, proud as punch by all accounts. Holmes exhaled a thin, blue wreath of smoke. As it should be. Lord Voss's last wish fulfilled. The coin that cost a life now belongs to everyone. I poured 2 glasses of port. The decanter was cool and heavy in my hand. The wine tasted rich and velvety, warming the throat against the slight chill that still lingered at the window. "The trial reports make grim reading," I continued. "Crowe received life, the others their terms. Mrs. March's conservatory has been sold, foxgloves and all. Langford's coin cabinets went under the hammer yesterday. Hargrove, they say, has turned to honest shipping work at the docks. The reddish clay will no longer mark his cuffs with guilt." Holmes nodded slowly. "Justice, Watson. Not dramatic, not poetic, simply inevitable. Once the facts aligned." The private buyer in Zurich sent a formal apology through diplomatic channels. No more offers. The game, as I once remarked, is truly afoot no longer. We sat in companionable silence for a time. The mantel clock ticked steadily. Outside, a late hansom rattled past, its wheels hissing on the damp road. The temperature in the room had risen pleasantly, the fire's heat contrasting with the cool night air pressing against the glass. "Looking back," Holmes said at length, "the case turned on such small things. A tremor in a forged signature, a speck of dockyard clay, the precise knowledge of digitalis that only a chemist and a gardener could share. I saw the pattern the moment Hargrove's gloves met the light, yet even I required the museum letter to close the final link." I smiled. "You saw it long before I did. I confess I stumbled among the suspects like a man in fog. The nephew's debts, Langford's bluster, Mrs. March's quiet reserve, each seemed plausible. Yet you traced every thread to Crowe without hesitation." Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "You underestimate yourself, old fellow. You noticed the scuff marks on the carpet when others saw only suicide. You felt the wrongness of the locked room when Lestrade was content. Our partnership, as always, supplied what each lacked alone." I set my glass down on the side table. The crystal rang softly. The broader reflection came unbidden. In the years I had chronicled these adventures, I had watched London change, new bridges, taller chimneys, faster trains, yet the human heart remained the same, capable of greed that could poison a friend and of loyalty that could restore what greed had stolen. This case had shown both sides clearly. The coin on the mantel caught my eye once more. It rested beside Holmes's pipe, no longer a trophy of crime, but a quiet symbol of order returned. The city beyond our windows moved on. Omnibuses rumbling, street vendors calling, the great pulse of life continuing without pause. Holmes rose at last, knocking ash from his pipe with a soft metallic tap. "Another case closed, Watson. The world is neither better nor worse for it, only a little more just." I stood as well, stretching muscles grown stiff from the long day. The fire had burned lower now, casting a warm, intimate glow across the room. The night air outside smelled clean and new, promising spring. To those who have followed this account from the chill autumn evening when the case first knocked upon our door, through the shadowed streets and rain-slick wharves, to this quiet fireside moment, I offer my sincere thanks. You have walked beside us in spirit. Now may your own observations prove sharper than mine, and may the truth, when it comes, bring you the same quiet satisfaction it has brought me. The lamp on the table burned, steady and clear. Baker Street lay peaceful beyond the curtains. Holmes gave a small nod, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And now, Watson," he said softly, "the game rests until the next."